Okay. All right. Okay. We're here for the bill that's just been recommitted back to rules. It's recommitted on my request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hear the amendments. You will vote on the amendments as we go through them. And then that's the bill that will go back out on the floor if you approve all of them, whatever. Again, we're working off of a rules substitute. And the problem was, Ms. Abrams? They will travel to your desk. They will travel to your desk. Okay. The first thing, who? Yes, sir. I'm going to do it. Y'all just listen up. I'll get you there. Again, we are talking about the transportation bill that was the Rules Committee substitute that you should have the number. Somebody can give me the number. I ain't got it. It's 170, but the Rules substitute number, the LC number. It's what? Give me the number. That one?
Yeah, it's that one right there.
Okay. All right. The bill that we're talking about is the one that used to be 170. It's LC 34459-5S. And again, the bill's right that way. On your desk, you have an amendment offered by Mr. Setzler. Mr. Setzler, you're on. Okay, you're done.
Thank you. The Setzler, Ramsey, Earhart, Golick Amendment 0679 recognizes we're making a very strong commitment as a state to transit. And I think that's I think the time has come for that. We have $100 million this year in our bond package to fund transit capital. And what 0679 does is, in a way that mirrors the way MARTA happens here in the metro area, for a county to participate in MARTA, there's a requirement for a referendum vote to bring rail into their county. What this would simply do is establish the same baseline statewide. To have rail transit in your county, there'd be a referendum vote before it happens. It's a very simple amendment.
Take some time. Anybody else like to comment on the amendment? Wait just a second.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Rogers, I'll make the orders in here.
Mr. Chairman, this was brought to me by Ledge Council. I got that late yesterday evening in anticipation of offering it. So I don't know if there's discretion for that. I certainly was seeking to tie to the committee substitute as amended.
It is my understanding that we are in here because of me having the wrong number of the amendment because I put it on at the incorrect time. If there's another
Mr. Chairman, in order to facilitate a smooth conversation, I would go ahead and move that the amendments be considered in alignment with the substitute as it currently sits in the committee, and that we instruct council, if amendments are adopted, to align those amendments to the substitute as we pass it out.
Anybody got a problem with that? Okay. Does anybody else want to speak on that amendment? Mr. Roberts, do you have any comments? It's your bill. Mr. O'Neill.
Chairman Setzler, thank you for bringing this amendment. And I know the language has been around since 1965, so I probably should understand what it means. And this is truly a question, because I think this applies. I want to make sure I understand it the way it's worded. This applies basically to every county in Georgia, not just your home county or my home county. It's every county except the two counties that currently have mass transit, right?
Except three. It applies to every county except for Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton. So they've already approved the MARTA referendum. So they wouldn't have any requirement to do any more referendums. They're already in. But for a county other than those, to take the big step towards fixed rail transit, they would have a referendum in their county. Very simple one. It's picked the date set by the county commission and so forth. A simple referendum to say, hey, we want rail transit to come into our county.
And that language is in any county other than. That's how
That's
how
correct.
I should have
so
understood.
this has zero effect on Fulton, DeKalb, or Clayton.
So this is not a carve out for any particular beneficial county. This affects the whole state in that regard, and it basically says to take this kind of step, we need the vote of the people of Georgia.
Just levels the playing
each individual thing.
Yes,
Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
Any other questions? All right. We've got a move from Mr. Setzler. Do I hear a second? Second. All right. We're going to have a raise your hand vote. All those in favor of Mr. Setzler's amendment, raise your hand. Okay, those opposed? All right, it was the Mr. Setzler's amendment is approved. All right, what that means, it will go on your desk as a rules amendment. Legislative Council will change the name the number, so that when you get there, there'll be this amendment, and that LC 344595S will be the number on your amendment to the that Mr. Setzler offered. The next And I'm going to ask you to please stick with me on this one. The amendment that we originally put on there was AM 251343. That's going to be changed. And you can see how the amendment is written. Amend the substitute to HB 170 LC 344595S by replacing 29.2 cents on line 434 with 24 cents. The chair is going to incorporate in that amendment the amendment that you have listed on your, and you're going to have to write this amendment. This will be a new amendment. You're going to have to write it down since it has not been printed yet. It should be printed before you leave the room. The one that says AM 340685. That amendment will be you should have it. I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to read it. Yeah, it's just the first 5 lines. Yeah. On that, yeah. This will be lines 1 through 5. And again, it's going to start, and I'm going to read it to you. Amend the substitute to HB 170 LC 344595S by striking lines 435 and 436 and inserting in their place the following: sell or use motor fuel other than diesel fuel within this state, except as otherwise provided in paragraph 1.2 of this subsection. An excise tax is imposed at the rate of 28 cents per gallon on distributors who sell or use diesel fuel within this state. Mr. O'Neill.
Chairman, that's added for consistency purposes to the original amendment, which we're re-voting on, and frankly was an oversight on my part. The purpose of my first amendment was because the latest iteration of our Transportation Initiative 170 had basically put, you would have to add local taxes to the 29.2. My view was we're paying the local taxes twice because the local taxes had already been computed in the 29.2 of the first iteration of 170 before that was sort of negotiated back to the local governments. So for the same purpose, the 33 cents that was on diesel, which is a much more expensive motor fuel, also already had the local portion in it. And since the final iteration of 170, in my analysis, you would also have to add that local taxes. This 5 cents difference is backing off what would have been twice a charge to our taxpayers, the people that buy diesel at the pump, and the citizens that buy motor fuel at the pump for the same reason. So that's what is about the amendment, and it was my oversight. There's no difference in diesel and ordinary motor fuel, with the exception of the cost. That's the reason they're handled and dealt with separately in the code, and it happens to run even right in almost consecutive lines to where the motor fuel was. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer any questions in that regard, but we use the same 5 cents to represent the local share that I felt like we're being taxed twice for because of changes that were made to deal with transparently and forthrightly with local government issues since the bill was first introduced. So that's the purpose, and I had just left out diesel, and I take full responsibility for that. It should have been in my first amendment. Be happy to answer any questions.
Have we got that anywhere? All right, I'm gonna read to y'all what this amendment. Is my number correct? Where's Keith? All right. The amendment number, AM 340688. And when you combine those things, it reads down here. I know you don't. I know you don't have it. I know you don't have it. It's being printed. It amends the substitute to HB 170 LC 344595S by replacing 29.2 cents on line 434 with 24 cents. And then 2, by striking lines 435 and 436, which y'all saw on the other one, and inserting in their place the following: sell or use motor fuel other than diesel within this state. An excise tax, in other words, we're skipping that first part of that sentence, is imposed at the rate of 28 cents per gallon on distributors who sell or use diesel fuel within this state. Is there any question on what I've just said? If there is no question, Mr. Leader, do you want to move?
Yes, sir. I move that we adopt the amendment to go to the floor along with the bill to be voted on the floor.
All right, you've got a motion and a second. I'll give you one other opportunity. Any more discussion? Mr. Rogers.
How much money are we raising now after this amendment passes? Leader O'Neill, I know you're removing the double tax, but what are we still looking at? 500 million?
Mr.
I don't have all of those computations in front of me, and I'm sure you're going to hear that over and over for the next couple hours when we get in the House. But I would defer that question to the author of 170, who spent 9 months analyzing every penny of this, and I think he was better qualified to answer that than me.
Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're looking at, if this amendment passes, about a $250 million reduction from where we're currently at on our fiscal note, which is somewhere between 700 and 1.1 billion on the high end, 700 million on the low end. You can basically figure right at $60 million for every 1 cent excise tax.
Okay.
That answer.
We're passing them out now, but I'm going to ask you again, by a show of hands, your vote. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Those opposed? Again, the ayes have that. So that what's being passed out to you now will be what's on the table for you to have the opportunity to vote on again once it gets on the floor. Okay. The next amendment is offered by Mr. Golick. It's AM 340684.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're supposed to be back on the floor 3 minutes ago. Is that right? So I'll try to do the 20-second version. This amendment would apply to Cobb, Gwinnett, and Cherokee counties, and that's not by design. That's just the way this situation has occurred. The discovery was made literally late this afternoon, and we've been learning as we go that because those three counties don't charge a lost, those three counties obviously are having a less amount of money that are going to be converted from sales tax to excise. So where you have a loss, you have that extra penny, more sales tax is being converted to excise. Whereas in Cobb, we have one fewer penny because we don't have a loss. Same thing with Gwinnett, same thing with Cherokee. And so what this does, what this proposed amendment does, is for those counties that do not have a loss and therefore have less money converting from sales to excise, it would go ahead and reduce commensurately by one penny's worth of excise by 2.5 cents, from 24 cents from the Leader O'Neill's amendment to 21.5 cents, to be in parity with where we are now in terms of excise. It is not a special advantage. It is not a punishment on another county in any other jurisdiction. In our opinion, it is simply keeping parity with where we are now, because those three counties, again, Cobb, Gwinnett, and Cherokee, don't have the loss now. So it is simply keeping parity with where they are in terms of excise tax rate. And that's essentially what it does. Again, I think it's extremely important to stress that it doesn't reach out and punish any other jurisdiction. It is simply a matter of keeping pace of where we are now in terms of excise, nothing more, nothing less.
Mr. Ramsey.
I guess I have a technical question and a substance question. Because the amendment that you and I were going to offer to deal with the diesel issue, going from 33 to 28, embedded in that amendment also was the same concept that you're talking about here on diesel, on motor fuel, and we would apply to diesel. It deals with the same offset issue. So I would ask the author if he'd be okay on the amendment that deals with the same offset issue. It's lines 6 through 11 on AM 340685. I would suggest that we amend your amendment so the concept that you're talking about on motor fuels also is dealt with on diesel fuel.
I have no objection to that. I mean,
okay.
The principle is the same.
Okay, and that's right. That's right. And just to be clear, just so I understand make sure that I understand the offset issue. Effectively, right now, my county, or every county that has a third penny of tax, whether it's lost, host, most, based on where DOT, or based on where the motor fuel rate is pegged right now, we're paying 28.1 cents. That's our effective rate. When you convert the sales tax into an excise and it's collected, we're paying 28.1 cents of tax. But in Cobb County, where you only have 2 pennies of local tax, you're paying roughly 25 cents in tax at the pump. And all this amendment does is accounts for that difference locally, where the local jurisdictions made the decision not to have that third penny of tax. This puts everybody on par effectively from where they are now, and make sure make sure we're comparing apples to apples in terms of functional rate from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
That's my understanding. It's an effective maintenance of the status quo, as opposed to those three jurisdictions paying more in excise than where they are now and where they would be under the bill.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Okay. Got Ms. Smith.
Thank you. My question is, I'm trying to follow this process, and so if I go to the end of this process, and it has in fact occurred, where does parity come back in if a Cobb, Gwinnett, or Cherokee decides to pass it? So then what happens?
It reverts.
Then you have an inequitable position on the other end.
No, it would revert exactly to where other jurisdictions are
Is
that have the
that
law.
stated here? Pardon me, is it?
I think that's, yeah, believe it's in the amendment.
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you.
Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the parity issue here, but how do we, in this amendment, since we're moving towards parity, how do we account for those counties that have already voted for T-Splosh?
Mr. Roberts. Your button's mashed. Mr. Setzler.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to speak to the issue of T-Splosh because someone brought that to me earlier. It's a fair question. The penny on T-Splosh, motor fuels are not taxed as part of that structure. So there's no penny to convert over. This is simply a circumstance where counties that have a force, taking the schools and the SPLOST aside, which is being dealt with effectively in the chairman's bill. What we're looking at is counties that have a 4-penny sales tax on gasoline versus counties that have a 5-penny sales tax on gasoline. Counties that have passed a LOST have 5 pennies to convert over to excise. Counties that don't have a LOST have 4 pennies to convert over. All this amendment does is converts every penny that's currently being levied. If you have 4 pennies, it converts all your 4 pennies. If you have 5 pennies you're levying with a LOST, it converts all 5 of those. So as Chairman Golick says, it doesn't create inequity, it simply tracks the existing. If you've initiated a LOST, it moves that money over as well. There's no inequity there. There's no non-uniformity because it ties to whether or not you've passed a LOST.
Mr. Earhart.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on what Representative Setzler said and what Representative Golick said, and to somewhat answer Representative Ramsey's question, if you look at lines 10 through 12 in the Golick amendment, you'll find that there is the diesel fuel lineup that you were asking about that's in the O'Neill amendment as well. So, and secondarily, the Representative Chairman Smith's question is if one of those taxes is levied on line 10, and collected in a county, this paragraph shall cease to apply, therefore putting everyone in the same equitable position. The bottom line is, if we don't pass this amendment, then those taxpayers in those 3 counties will be paying a dipped amount of tax. And we've equalized that for those counties and those people who passed a T-Splosh. We've equalized it for the cities and the counties and everything else. This is just a very equalizing amendment. There's no special treatment here whatsoever. It's just everybody, every single citizen be treated the same.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Golick, my question also goes to the constitutionality of this amendment. Early in this process, because I am from a T-Splosh area, I went to Legislative Council and had an amendment drawn up that would have not allowed this increase in the excise tax to go into effect in the T-Splosh areas. At that time, I was advised in writing by Legislative Council that you could not, because of the uniformity clause in our Constitution, have a different excise tax in different counties in the state. Now, I understand Chairman Setzler's explanation as to the sales tax portion of it. That difference in sales tax is applicable to my areas because we have a sales tax difference for T-Splosh, but it does not change the fact that you're creating an inequity in the amount of excise taxes amongst the counties in the state. Believe me, if I could have done that, I would have offered a similar amendment for my T-Splosh areas. But I was advised in writing and by Legislative Council that it could not be done.
I appreciate the question. I don't dismiss the issue of uniformity because it's something that comes up with tax legislation from time to time. I think the most infamous example that we've had here during our time, was on Stevens Day and on assessment freezes, homestead freezes, and so forth. And ultimately, while that's a different set of issues from a tax standpoint, generally where you have disparities from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, those have been upheld. And frankly, where we've had assessment freezes, that's an even greater disparity within jurisdictions. I would tell you, just from a macro standpoint, from a high level, this is, again, it's not going out of its way to create disparity or to create inequality. Again, it's to maintain the status quo, first and foremost. And then there's the ultimately, from a legal standpoint, it's a political question of, well, jurisdiction X, Cobb County, Gwinnett County, could go ahead and pass a law, at a time certain this year or next year, and then would revert back. So I don't dismiss that as a potential issue, but we have much worse issues that we've seen from a uniformity standpoint that have stood up. I believe this would, and so that leads us to the next question, which is the big question around here all the time. What is to be lost and what is to be gained? In the name of fairness and maintaining the status quo in terms of what consumers are paying in Cobb, in Cherokee, and Gwinnett without punishing any other jurisdiction, which is important, and this amendment does not do that. Wouldn't we want to go ahead and go that extra step to make sure constituents in those three counties don't end up paying more than they really should under fairness under this bill?
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just trying to keep up with the math. Can somebody tell me how far south are we now? I don't know where we're at. Have we still got some money in this bill?
Yeah, and it's all coming to your county.
Now, I can live with that, but there's going to be 158 that ain't going to get nothing because there's about enough left just for us.
Mr. Setzler, you got more? All right, we're going to vote. Mr. Golick, you want to make your motion?
I move adoption of Amendment AM 340684 to the Rules Committee substitute of House Bill 170, and for that amendment to be sent to the floor as a proposed amendment in front of the House to the Rules Committee substitute of House Bill 170.
You have a motion. You have a motion and a second. I think I kept up with the motion. I'm not sure if I did or not. You have a motion and a second. Again, it's a hand raiser, and raise them a little higher this side. I couldn't see. All those in favor of the amendment, raise your hand. All those opposed? The opposition has it. Okay. Setting the supplemental calendar for today. House Bill 170 with two amendments. Two amendments be on the floor. Is there a move? We've moved. All right, the calendar is set. Bye, y'all.
No good deed goes unpunished. No good deed goes unpunished.
Just raises taxes 3 cents higher. Because you already have.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I didn't vote, so be nice.
That's the best thing about being chair.
That's what legislature.